done better, should have been there more, should have like created this space for them, when our space alone has never been created because we've never been allowed to. And
Yeah.
I'm not here to speak against any specific gender or any specific, you know, whatever. I'm just here to speak against the inequality of it. I'm here to say that this is conditioned behavior, this is ego behavior, this is plain and simple. We have to open our eyes to it. My husband is an amazing husband, but he silenced me too until I was willing to stand up for who I am and what I represent and not take any, you know, any shit beyond that. You know, it's just a conditioned response. When he became conscious of, you know, these limiting me behaviors, he immediately fixed them because he does love me. He does want to watch me shine, and he's enamored by what it is that I do. He tells people that, like, people will write and be like, I'm sorry if I upset you, you know, by saying that to your wife. And my husband will immediately respond with, my wife can handle her own shit. If you have a problem with her, take it up with her. Because I handle myself just fine. He's always beside me, but never in front of me. And so, you know, having that kind of confidence to know that most of these masculine are divine, and most of these masculine, if you just bring it to the conscious awareness, they're ready to make that change. And you know, and so, you know, of course, we're still going to run into these deeply conditioned males that want to live in this existence because they're winning. Of course they do. It's scary on the other side, because the only way that I think I read somewhere that the only way men can see women in power is this exact, you know, this exact playing field, only in reversed. And of course that's scary to them, because then
it depends where, well, it also depends where they are in their own level of consciousness, doesn't it? How proactive they've been, and whether they reflect on the relationships they've had, and whether they throw ownership of that over to the other person, because it's all of those psychological features that take part. And there are some, because again, like I put in the messages, you know, there are some relationships that are only meant to be short-lived, but we're blindsided because society says, you know, this is who you are as a woman, and then you stay in that situation unhappy otherwise, without growing or without money or whatever, and it was perfectly acceptable. And there's layers of what social conditioning has privileged certain populations with, but the male population with. And also there's a lot of things, because I was thinking the other day, you know, if I think about my background and how men and families were portrayed, and what the messages we received as women about who we were lucky to end up with, you know, because that was still the focus. And even if as a girl I was independent and had my own mind, I still went through all these situations, even though I've had some guidance on that and ignored it, of just getting in relationships, really, or not even relationships, they're not relationships early on, that just were never going to suit me, because it really goes back to that. You really do have to know yourself. It's not just being about independent and knowing your own stuff and having your own mind, but it's the degrees of the kind of things you start to pick up, like little comments. I said to a friend initially, I might have apologized for being the way I was sometimes. I remember, because I can be quite intellectual, and I remember someone saying to me once, you know, oh, you just go too deep. And then I sat back and I was like, I don't understand what you're on about, because what's not deep? You know,
sorry that I became the ocean that you swam in. Would you like me to shallow up?
Exactly.
You know,
but then I thought, so, and I had got better and better at just saying, well, I can't really be other than who I am, or you're counselling me, because I knew I was a therapist. You know, I worked as a therapist years ago. And I said again, well, no, I'm not, because the contracting counselling denotes I only listen to you, and it's not a two-way street, and you'd be handing money over. But no, I'm not.
I'm being your friend is what I'm being. And this is the type of friend that I am. And I picked therapy as a profession because I'm natural at it. So if you feel that I'm therapying you, then perhaps it's time that you receive some therapy. I have a list of people you can contact, you know, but it's not my fault that you are using like your reflection here as something
Yeah.
that I am not being. And it's
Yeah.
so hard because we are taught that, like, I fell victim to this. It didn't take, it was in my 30s that it finally fell victim to
Yeah.
it, where I was stood up for my own stuff. I knew who I was. I knew my worth. I didn't care if you liked me because I liked me. And, and then I got into this crowd of people that, like, there was no depth to be found.
Yeah.
None.
And then that's then tough, isn't it? And I think at first you can, if you're a woman that's been, which again are the themes, accommodating, apologetic, or trying to, because the empathy and smoothing things away and helping things feel okay for other people, which again all have negative connotations to them, or styles of behavior, then of course we end up apologizing for being the very thing that makes us really good at who we are and what we do. And then I started noticing, and I thought they only had to say that to me once then, and that was it. Because I thought, once you've said that is going back to that point of the bigger issue of thinking no one's ever going to be able to truly receive me for the greatness that I am. Therefore, do I? And it's a bit like, there's a phrase, isn't there, where you go back to trying to be in this space, and you can't, because you totally can't even do it. So you have to make a decision, or think, actually, maybe, like entrepreneurs are not, the world isn't ready for them sometimes, and sometimes the space you're in and the people that inhabit that may not be ready for you, but you can't, why would you apologize for it? Because actually
All it does is rip you apart. They talk about soul retrieval. Well, for me, soul retrieval is as basic as you hand pieces of yourself away,
pieces of yourself away,
through this conditioning or through these experiences, and you're like, okay, well, I guess this isn't meant to suit me, and you hand it over. And I guess that's not meant for me, and you hand it over. Well, I just came in the adult class and said I need it all back. And so
it took me a while to understand that meant that, though. I didn't realize that every thought you've put out and every scenario where you've sold yourself short or whatever, I didn't realize what that meant. And I think that's some of the things with spiritual models that are tricky to get your head around, because it's like the sort of deep concepts that we don't really talk about. I think in society everyone's got some understanding that we've got a star sign, we've got a personality, and we might have allowed our boundaries to be stepped over or whatever, but it's only those that pursue that sort of idea, isn't it, that then really start to get, oh wow, every time I've done that, and so when the idea about getting your power back and owning that just can come effortlessly from just going, well, no, I'm just not even going to get into that space, because eventually, just like we'll never come across certain people or relationships, eventually there won't even be any space anyway, so you won't even have to have a conversation about whatever the thing is that you have that conversation about, and then you forget it and go, I can't even talk about it now because I don't even relate to that anymore.
Literally, I had that discussion just today with one of my friends, and there was this which you'll get to know about me, which I'm sure you, in our first real conversation, got to know quite nicely, is I have no problem standing up against, like, egregious wrongs, like, just cannot handle it. Was starting this company with this person that had their awakening, but you forget how strong the ego plays a game in narcissism. And he ended up, instead of teaching lesson, he became the lesson. And this lesson was so far reaching for so many people that people are to this day still trying to recover from it, still working on it, and still, like, pushing through it. And so in today's conversation, like, this person brought up one of the because it was him and his wife, and they brought up the wife, and I just, like, it was as if I just got knocked over the head, and, like, they wanted just to keep continuing to do it. I was so shaken by even having to consider these people in my existence anymore that I lost it. I just was like, we're not speaking of them anymore, we're not having a conversation, you bring them up, I hang up, I am done. And so it's like, when you reach that precipice and you push yourself out of that cycle, it's like, it feels like the wrongest thing you could do is turn around, and it's like I have no time or space here for that conversation, because that conversation is a looping conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And even if you go through whatever processes to manage and move on from it, we realize, don't we, that entertaining something again is just reigniting, giving it space, or creating.
Not a good place. It's just not. Once you've hit that place, it's like you would rather like set yourself on fire than to have to walk into that cycle again.
Yeah.
It becomes so unnerving that you refuse to do it. I touched a hot plate today in politics, and it wasn't me speaking about politics. It was a political post, and it was me speaking about the spiritual aspect of the deeper understanding and what politics is. And of course, being the water, I can go as deep as you need. However, they're going to go to the level of consciousness. And it just became this. And like, I simply wrote two things, and they were very clear, very to the point. And it's, like, we've got to move beyond this. Like, this is simply another matrix, another game set up to divert our attention from here and from self.
Yeah.
And the more that we externalize all of this division, the more division there's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's just very simple for me. And people just, at the end of the day, we have to start looking in. We have to stop. We got to cut out the noise. We've got to focus on self. And I call the movement selfishly selfless, where you are taking every ounce of selfishness in you and to turn it and just to focus on you.
Yeah. So and not get drawn into that
for everybody else.
Yeah.
And it really.
Just bear with me 1 sec. I'm just checking my pen ain't burning. Right, I'm back.
She's back.
Yeah, the liquid was just going to the place of disappearing completely.
I love it.
I mean, we're touching on all the sort of deeper mechanisms, aren't we, that have been coming more to the surface, or more people have become aware of them, or the movement has got stronger about them, whether it's what has been triggered. Because in a way, the trigger of what's happening is part of, like what you're saying, that process of, if we're triggered, it's something for us to experience and look at, as well as the group collective trigger, as well as it moves people forward. But then that element that also sits under that or around that, which is of purposely orchestrating things. And I think sometimes that's where it's probably difficult to refine what that is, of orchestrating things so that you are deflected and move outside of yourself. And it's quite a balance, or quite a whole series of processes that are quite tricky to deploy. And I think I know my saving grace is just knowing that I only have to get up, come and sit here and sit on the sofa and be in this space that mostly is peaceful, without even leaving the front door. Because even just going to the shops and coming past people and things like that, that if you are reading this stuff and then it's in your psyche and you're kind of reflecting on it, you kind of just know, don't you, that the rest of your day has the potential to spark off all sorts of other stuff that you just don't get involved with.
Yeah, for today, the political post for me was more on the spiritual side, because I'm working, I have all of these little things that are, I've put my eggs in several baskets.
Yeah.
It's because I'm just ready for, like, I'm ready to be in action, the things that I need to see changed. So I'm supposed to be working with one of these people, and it's just been such divisive conversation, and it's choosing a side and then stating that they're not choosing a side. And so for me, it was like, I need you to wake up. I need you to see what you're doing. And it has nothing to do with the politics, because the moment I wrote off politics, the moment my life became much better. The reality is politicians for me are simply the puppets And what we need to look at is who the puppet masters are. And if you follow the deity that is the dollar sign, you're going to find the people in charge. And there's very few of those people. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist in that way. I'm just a common sense person. And if we are tied up in this money game, which we are, the deity is money that we worship. You know, if money rules right now, where's the money coming from? Well, that's a few people. Well, then you look and see what these people own, and it kind of just starts to, it's just simply following the pattern, following the lines and seeing where they connect. And they connect to these puppet strings that are the politicians, and these puppet strings that are the news source. And we have really no way of grasping the truth inside of any of it. So what do? The same way you play games with a narcissist, don't play. You just simply close it and move on, because nothing you are going to do or say is going to change that right now. Because that those little puppets are doing nothing for you. You've got to work above it.
Because you could cover them all in, covers, couldn't you? Because it wouldn't make a difference, really. They might sound different, or they might enact certain policies, but when you get to the crux of that, hence why I don't, same with UK politics, we've been influenced, and vice versa, by what goes on in America and what goes on in New Zealand anyway, because you only have to watch a few things about those countries. But it's how I think sometimes what I struggle with, because I don't have a desire really a lot of the time to get involved in those conversations, but they come up, and it's meaningful to the people, because of course, like anything, so I don't know if you've heard of it, but existential theory, so existential philosophy. And that idea is, I used to use it a bit when I worked as a therapist, but it applies to everything in life, that whatever you walk out and say you walk in this house, and whatever you notice becomes the conversation. And every conversation, it's not hierarchical. There is not better things to talk about, worse things to talk about. You just know that has been what's attracted that person's focus in that moment. So when I worked with clients, and we had the therapy room, you'd have bare walls, and you'd only have 2 chairs and a table. But I remember one time we moved the furniture around for some reason, and a client came in and was totally disorientated and angry, and all of these things that were going on for them. And we started talking about the table and the chairs, and the training told people, you have to find the feelings, you have to find this, you have to find that. But the table and chairs was what was disconcerting to the client, because getting underneath that was about their anxiety when they walk in and expect everything to be the same, or when they just have assumptions, they don't even think about it. And in a way, that little sort of metaphor of what goes on is what is going on everywhere now as well, and one I'm mindful of, because I don't always feel, I feel rocked and sideways sometimes, that's happening for everybody. And I was chatting with a friend the other night.
Change.
Pardon?
People don't like change.
Well, they don't even, I think the thing is
the idea of
they don't even know
something else.
Yeah, but they don't even know that exists within them if their life has been pretty sort of stable. Because even when you've got a stable life, but you've been chaotic, or there's been trauma, there's always a part of you that sort of is on alert.
Absolutely.
But you don't necessarily know that until you get that level of awareness of, gosh, every time I do this, I'm a bit jittery. So it comes in harder for some of those people, and that's on a small level. But when it's on a sort of bigger level, it comes in much harder, because the way that we try and cope with that is like how people cope then with change or shock, and it's all those behaviours that are fired up. And that if your coping mechanism's quite poor, you let those behaviours spill out everywhere, or you shout at your partner, or you bash your trolley into somebody in the supermarket, or you read something on Facebook, because the social conditioning around niceties and etiquette has completely disappeared, hasn't it? Because we knew how to write a letter, and where to put someone's name and address in the corner, and we would have that etiquette, but no one's really taught etiquette online. And
No.
how do
Well,
you
we're also living in the time of the Wild West online. You know, we're in the internet's Wild West period. And, you know, we already know that there's going to be some changes that have to happen. And there's going to have to be some, and people, you know, are demanding this freedom of speech, but then crying in a corner
when someone says something
for the same speech that they're saying that we need to have. So
yeah,
there's going to have to be some kind of leveling out in this Wild West area that we have going right now. But
that's an interesting point, actually, that I haven't thought of it like that, because what you're saying is we're at the very baby step stage of transition, and part of that transition is when people act in all sorts of like the Wild West ways, where they just react and shoot and jump. And I haven't looked at it.
Did you look at me funny?
Give me your horse.
And people aren't grasping that, like, these social media platforms, you know, you've got one of two options. You either share your personal space, or you share the space that you want to create for this online platform. And you can't get mad if you choose it to be a personal space, that these people that have not taken it into a personal space are kind of like offended, or like, what do I say, they speak up and the person's offended. Well, you can't be in that both places. You're not it's just not feasible for people. And so, you know, create the space and the environment that you want to be in online. And then, you know, for me, Drake, I have this 90-pound lab, but you know, for me, like, my personal space is very personal for me, and I don't want to go out and share for the masses. Every personal thing that goes on for me, it kind of takes away some of that. I'm not saying that I am inspired by a lot of these people using their personal journey online. It's just not for me. I choose to create.
There's risks, isn't there? There's risks with doing that. And once it's on there, and I think that's the thing, is I think, like anything, whether I'm in the personal or professional, is I share what I'm happy someone else knowing until I know the entity, person or whatever, a lot more, you know. And in terms of, like, you know, a lot of people, there's all this stuff that nobody knows about them that they wouldn't have want other people to know. But as we move on, because this is also the evolvement of transparency, isn't it? You know, the capacity to match up, to have some congruence with what we're saying and what we're doing and what someone's picking up. And one of the biggest issues in children's mental health that does cause mental health issues, I'm not talking about parents who got irrational from time to time, get angry or whatever. These are parents that say one thing consistently, but their energy says something else consistently. And that is one of the sort of key recipes for creating a disturbed child, with some of the other things thrown out.
If you will, inside of a child's mind.
Yeah.
Because my dad says he loves me, but then he beats me when he's angry at me. So what is this? If he comes in and says, I love you, and I'm doing this because I love you, and now I'm in pain, you know, you create this sense of, you know, and you live
and distort the view, don't you? You distort the view of what love is. And then, of course, we know all the issues that arise from, whether that is trauma or from the depressed parent that just struggles to function and can't respond. So it's very interesting times in that way. And it was interesting what you started saying earlier about where you're at, because I'd be interested to hear more about like you're saying you're here and you're feeling this real push for freedom, and you're experiencing these things. But what does that mean? What does a push for freedom mean? And how does that look different now to how it has looked in the last 6 months? And are these steps, or is this
yes,
a big
absolutely. These are definitely steps that you have to take. For me, it started with the recognition of self. I literally had to see myself again. I had to, oh my goodness, you're going to walk with me so I can get this dog out. 90 pounds of pure drama.
What's your dog called?
His name is Drake, like the male duck.
We have, yeah. So he might be our mascot, though. You see, so
It's true. He does like the spotlight.
so he might be. It'd be conversations with. Is it Dre or Drake?
Drake.
Yeah, conversations with Drake. He's actually my son's favorite artist as well.
Oh, that's funny. People have asked us if that's who we named him after. We're like, no, he's a dog.
Well, I looked after a friend's dog once, and every time I use it now for some the name of the dog for some of the things that I've wrote, and people will look at me, and I now have to say the same thing. It's always about names. So they say, "What was the dog your first pet called?" Well, I never had a pet, but I did look after this dog. So I said Luther, and I can see it in their eyes. And I said, "No, not Luther on telly, Luther Vandross. The guy was really into 80s." And either way, I'm not sure which one sounds more appropriate. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're going Luther off the telly, the detective, or Luther Vandross. So
funny. That is so funny. But yeah, so the journey for me was like, it kind of, well, it was a no option journey. I was literally in the, like, in a mode of, I was either going to end my life or I was going to have to move forward. And there was this heavy amount of period, this very long period of time that cycle kind of erupted itself when my mom passed away. And the three boys, she had passed away on Christmas morning. I woke up to that phone call, and she had adopted 3 children. Well, I already have 3 children, so now I have 6 children. And so now grieving the loss, the surprise loss of an otherwise healthy individual on a major holiday, I also was starting over as a parent, because at the time my youngest was in 6th grade, and now my youngest was in pre-K. Like,
wow.
He was a 5-year-old. And so I went from this, like almost looking forward to beginning this other half of my life and all of this travel and all these things that I wanted to do, to, oh my God, I am going to be a parent my whole life. I am literally, by the time I, stopped. And so I, through that was like that final moment of, oh my gosh, I'm so broken. Like, I can't even find space for myself anymore. To that it becomes healing, and you just start healing and healing and healing. And part of that healing is becoming mad and standing up for yourself and creating those boundaries. And then the next step is like to heal those places that you've created those boundaries, recognize where you've gone wrong in it, self-acceptance, self-acknowledgement, look in the mirror. And then it's just that pattern. It just keeps going and going and going until you've reached a space where you're ready to step out and say, I'm ready to create a new cycle. I am in the beginning. I tell people that if you spend 1 year on yourself, 1 year, your whole life will change. I just shut out all the noise, and I decided that I was going to take myself first. And, within 2 months, I was already beginning to be this whole new person. And so then it became work on myself and my relationship inside of my family. And so that became, the next project. And so now I'm at this point where I can kind of grasp how I'm working with myself, la, la, la. Now I'm extending that out to my family. And now I'm seeing this cohesiveness. Now I can extend that a little bit further out. And then I started within the friend groups and knowing where my boundaries were, what I could and could not accept, healing inside of I have some funny stories. I didn't get bullied until my 30s. And then it became this outright online, just insanity thing. I don't even know. It was wild. And so it was like realizing, where I could have been different in those places, where I could have stood my ground, where I could have just exited, that taking the high road was probably the best lesson before my awakening. I was taking the high road anyways. I wasn't responding back. And so now I make a joke of it. You take the high road, so when you stop to pee, they get rained on. But, for me, it was like, probably that week we talked about, the week between Christmas and New Year's, that week, was that a full moon week? I want to say it was. That would make the most sense, because new moon was just last night. So if that was full moon into new
Yeah.
moon, I want
There
to
was
say
certainly something going on. There was certainly something going on that week, or just lead up to that week.
and you,
Yeah.
if you think about the energies of that week, anyways, you had the conjunction that we haven't seen to make the star, the Christmas star that we haven't seen in however long. And, you know, we had this other conjunction
Yeah.
coming into the
Oh,
planets.
the 21st, yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, you've got all of that coming in energy wise for us. And
Yeah.
then, so that point, they kind of just said, you know, when I sat there in meditation, the walls started closing in on me. And everything, I just started feeling trapped, and I would look around and it would be like things were concaving, and like concave, like the mirrors would, you know, like not the windows were like sucked in, like I was like sucking in air to blow it out. It was crazy. And they kept looping this thought process for me that was like, you know, you're trapped in your own paradigm, you don't even know your own way out. And you know, when the
Wow.
universe comes calling, they're going to give you the biggest energy to shake you loose out of it, you know. So I fought out of the fear aspect of that, like looked around me, I was like, my husband's not keeping me trapped, and neither are my kids, so why do I feel trapped? You know, so you know, because I've gotten to the point of, I'm not a victim in this, I make my choices to get me to where I'm at. And I'm happy I'm happy where I'm at. I know that my soul, my heart craves more than that. And it was simply finding whatever esoteric stuff goes on out there that we haven't grasped the concept of. I would just call it energy. You know, it when it comes in and it's starting to rattle things up. When I say I'm feeling pushed, I literally feel like if I were to stay still any longer and not move ahead in my heart's desires, that I might as well shrivel up and die. And it's not because I'm taking away from the love that I have for my family and the love that they give me, or my friendships,
Yeah.
or small business ideas that I could have. It's because I know my soul's purpose is deeper than that. And I've gotten myself to this place of this knowing that my purpose is deeper than that. And without a doubt, I'm going to follow that lead, and that's in the heart. I've you know, I formed this bond. You know, I'm a logical thinker, I got this far on logic, but everything has its wall. And
Yeah.
logic hit the wall for me, and so I had to step back and step away from it. And now I'm like, I combined my heart and my mind together, and I let them work as a team. And now I'm being asked just to drop into the heart space and let my heart do the leading.
How did you do that? What does that feel like for you? The head and the
So
heart.
I am not a visual person. When I close my eyes, it's dark. I really, if I get a vision, it's more along the lines of like a hologram that sits off to the side, and it's like just this quick bloop, like bloop, and then I get the download with it. Okay, so I have to verbally say the things that I'm wanting to do. So in my meditation, I call it directed thought, because I, being a channeler and a thinker, um, I have to put these super highways in my brain, and these, you know, and I have to form them. And so I call it directed thought. So I have a game plan in my head before I go into meditation. And then in meditation, I begin to think thoughts about my mind and how beautiful and wonderful my mind is. And all of this work gets done for me. However, you have to be tired not listening to the heart. And then I talk to the heart. You are just so beautiful, and you follow through with all of these beautiful things. Maybe if you were to listen to the mind a little bit and work together as a team, that we could get even further. If you guys weren't fighting and we were working together, perhaps we could get a little bit further. And, you know, as an ego mind, it kind of's like, oh, further, you say? You know, and then the heart's like, I'm in. And so, and
Do you feel that? Do you see something? Because you said you do the highways in your mind.
Uh-huh.
And
I
then
imagine
you have
super
that conversation.
So when you think about, so I learned this when I was learning about depression. When it talks about, you know, just plain and simple, you're not having the synapses, you're not having those reactions at a little electrical push. Okay. And if you think about one pushing to the other, well, it really does look like a road that you could create there, right?
So are you saying the road that you don't want to go down, you see it's there, you see the potential, but you go, no, I'm flipping into the fast lane? Or
yeah, I built this new highway, I'm going to use it. this old highway is falling apart. It's full of potholes.
Yeah.
And the last time I drove down it, I wrecked my car. So instead, let's take this new highway. It's developed by me and this clear thought pattern that I have. It's going to take me where I need to go. So I can either listen to this old highway system that's gotten me lost and in car wrecks repeatedly, or I can purposefully direct my thoughts into this new highway.
Do you reckon so? Those thoughts on that highway, were they looped thoughts? Were they thoughts that were really familiar, like either self-condemnation or, you know, all of that sort of shit
No,
that goes through your head? Or was it something else?
now don't get me wrong, there's always this like baseline to it, but it would be like self-righteousness, or the need
Okay.
to be right, or the need to be understood, or this lack of love I'm feeling, these negative things.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like, well, what's the point when I know in my heart that I am loved beyond measure,
Yeah.
when I know in my mind that I am smart enough to keep up with anyone, when I
So
know
like the old statements. Yeah.
I can
And
see.
it's the only reason I'm asking you to sort of break it down because it's resonating, and mine came up like for me it felt like there was a grip on the side of the mountain, like making it keep go round in the, and I was like, what is going on? I can't unstick this, get off, you know. It was almost
Right.
like, get off. I'm noticing, because I do the highway stuff in terms of, I see it as a timeline. So I think I'm at risk of going down that timeline with this train of thoughts, or I can go down this one. I don't quite know what it looks like, but I just know that I feel lifted or I feel better if I think that way. But the grip sort of got stronger and it was harder. And mentally, I'm like, what's good? Because I get this stuff. I see what's happening.
Like, I'm
And
grasping the concept. Why do I keep going down this loop? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
almost like I said to my friend who's open to this stuff, I said to her, it's almost like has someone else got a laser and they're just firing these thoughts that are shooting inside of my head. And I know that there's potential for that. So it was almost like I'm observing them, but they won't, it won't lose the grip. So
Yeah, and that's I say, what is it? You should practice something for 3 weeks and it becomes second nature.
yeah,
And then that's the new pattern. Same
yeah,
thing with
yeah,
meditation. It's like, okay, I see this thought and this is a recurring thought. Do I explore this thought? I'll give myself a chance to explore the thought because I
yeah,
need work.
yeah,
But sometimes those thoughts are so like, I've worked through that thought. I've acknowledged that thought. I've gone into all the depths and
yeah,
perceptions and perspectives of that thought. This thought no longer is valid. So why am I still having it?
yeah.
Well, it's because your brain is like,
Just throwing it up anyway.
it's conditioning. Like you're here and it's
Yeah,
there and you memorized it. So it's going to pop up like every day, like an alarm. And so I'm just like, for me, it's as simple as remembering these basics. Like I know that if I do something for 3 weeks, it becomes second nature for me. So if I just keep for 3 weeks in meditation, directing the thought to a different place every time,
yeah,
then then
yeah.
that thought finally says, okay, you're not giving me
Loses its
oxygen, I'm
grip.
starving. And so that thought no longer exists because it's like and it's gone. It takes
Yeah,
time and practice. Our brain is
yeah,
a muscle too. So like you might have played sports in your youth, and so you have this type of muscle memory, but unless you go out and use that muscle memory, you're going to get, the muscle's gone. It's going to turn into flab and it's going to turn into softer skin and all of that. And your brain works in basically the same way. You've got to continue to practice that stuff. And
yeah.
that's
So
how I've done that on the directed thought and meditation. It's just to continue to take note, but force the thought pattern into more positive alignment to what it is that I know. And that's just
yeah,
kind of what I do with that. And right now I'm in the process of changing my personal, because meditation grows with you. And
yeah,
Yeah, I tell people all the time, you don't need to be, unless you're on the path of meditation and breath work. Meditation and breath work doesn't have to take up your day. You can simply play a
You don't have to
frequency.
sit there.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
play a
you don't have to sit
frequency
there
on.
like that for 2 hours.
Yes, I
Yeah.
couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I don't have that kind of time, and my dogs wouldn't let me do that. So, I just don't have that. But there's ways to meditate all the time. Like it's
Sitting back in my office chair, staring out the window,
taking a
having
shower,
that moment of,
your drive
yeah,
to work, doing the dishes. Like there's
yeah,
meditative space everywhere you go, and you just
yeah,
have to use that to your advantage. We live in a society that's go 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 right now,
yeah,
so find your time to slow, slow, slow. And
yeah.
even going to like baseball practices or games for your children, you're not out there playing. Why don't you sit back and clear your mind for a minute? It's in nature. It's the perfect space.
Yeah,
you know
yeah, yeah. And it's funny because I teach meditation sometimes, or if I'm teaching yoga, then I'll do a meditation, and I try and think about kind of what sort of subtext or message would I like them to get out of it. But I have said, and it's got stronger, that sort of conviction of, if you want to do that for an hour or 2 hours, and like you say, sit there all day and do that, that's fine. But you don't have to, because actually what I found was more important was to have some momentum and some space in which you did that, because it helps stop the brain from getting into the gripping process. And also there are times where, and I don't know if you've noticed this because you talked about channeling, is there are times where all of a sudden all these different bits of information come to me, and at first I'm like, go away thought, go away thought. And then I realized I was coming out with some really good stuff, and I drawed my mind, which is what happened to me the other morning when I sent you those pictures,
Yes.
because I woke up at like 5 o'clock, and all this stuff was in my head. And I was like, all right, I'll get up and I'll
Let me
draw
grab my
it.
pen.
And the light isn't even on and my eyes are sore. And I was like, all right, I'll draw.
I'm doing it. Yes, I understand that.
And
I
then
do.
it passes. And then
Well,
it,
like breath
yeah,
work I really see breath work coming to a forefront soon.
yeah, yeah,
And it's like using the meditative practices of clearing your mind, but doing that through breath work. And
yeah.
I don't mean this coined phrase of DMT breath work. I mean whatever breath work works for you.
Just
And
breathing
that could
sometimes.
yeah, and that could be as simple as, I call it the 5-5-5, which is like you take
Yeah,
a breath in for 5, hold for 5, release for 5. You do it 3 times.
yeah,
It kind of resets an energetics for you.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to trail off just a little bit on this because I think this is really cool and it kind of proves my point. My son joined the military last year, and then in the middle of basic, he was COVID hit. And so this, up until the 10th of this month, he had been gone for a full year. We haven't seen him. Like I
Wow.
got to go visit him, but there was like a no fly rule and all of that. But we were sitting there and talking, and luckily his girlfriend is spiritual by nature. And she wanted to do some card readings, and she was told my son that he needed to do card readings with me. And I was like, whoa, for me, that's awesome, because I've never forced my family to follow my path.
Mm,
And so
mm.
I'm telling him about some of these breath work things that he needed to do to help kind of regulate this energy in and out that he's going through. And he was like, Mom, they taught us this in basic. And
Wow.
he's like, this breath work specifically is basic, from basic. And then he said they even teach you how to breathe into the place in your body that's pain. And I
Yeah.
was like, Garrett, that's energy work. Like,
Wow.
this is what energy doctors teach people to do. These
Yeah,
specialists teach you to do, is to breathe into these spots of pain to help like break up the energy
exactly.
inside of that.
Yeah.
And he was like, really? And I was like, this is wild for me too. The
But
military,
isn't that fascinating when you realize? Yeah,
yeah.
when you realize it's become normalized in some contexts, that it isn't weird and spiritual. It's just, and especially the army and the navy, because they've been using research for years about a variety of things. Yeah, that's amazing.
Right? I thought so too. It really was kind of one of those moments of, well, that makes me feel really good. And, and it goes for my husband, who is active duty Air Force. And, he's really taught me a lot about these safety procedures that need to be taken as far as feminine, and how they're teaching them through these classes. We call it, he makes jokes, he makes light of it because they do it every 3 months, and he's 17 years in. He calls them how not to rape people class, and so yeah, well, so but the reality is like there's been a couple of situations in my existence while we've been married where I've seen it's rape. And when I call attention to it, I would be brushed aside, but my husband would be able to step up and say, hey, like, I get training on this all the time. That's rape. And so, which takes me back to that masculine, feminine bullshit. But, but, to know that this military who, might not do what's best for the individual, they're still noticing the trauma of being militarized.
Yeah.
And the conditioning involved in that. And they're trying to take that back and add back that human aspect to things. And I explained to my son that I'm never going to teach you anything that's not going to be backed scientifically in some way. Like we even talk about the placebo effect. Don't think you're not capable of healing 99% of what's wrong with you, well, then I would suggest you take a look at a couple of studies, reading up on this placebo effect, and how in some cases it's even higher than the actual pill itself, because
that's well documented, isn't it? How studies are difficult to really define the impacts of medication, because a proportion of that population will just buy into it anyway.
Yep.
And equally the opposite effects if you don't think something works, hence why I rarely go to the doctor. Yep. Because I've never really had to believe that that's the route I should go down. I just go down occasionally for certain things if I've either exhausted something else or whatever. But again, I kind of keep that to myself, because
I'm also a firm believer in Western medicine. I believe that we need to be working more hand in hand. And the more you work hand in hand, the greater we're going to have in this recovery. When we stop making the healthcare system about how much money you make and make it more about the health of the community, then we will have this understanding that we can use all of these different aspects to work better. It will launch you forward. And so I'm not anti-Western medicine. In fact, I encourage it for those who aren't ready to take
it's exploitation, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the theme that's run through a couple of things that we said, that this is an exploitation of how people are using their power. And the higher you are in any system.
And spirituality just as much to blame. For taking advantage. This is a lot of the reason why we have a hard time being validated or to be acknowledged in the deserving way we do, because we have had people take advantage of the system. And this is just across the board. We really just have to start focusing our intent on self and stop running around trying to heal everybody in these places that we're not even healed. And, that's just across the board for me. Like, heal yourself in a place and then go teach what you learned.
Do you know, it's an interesting point, because I think it was sort of fairly good realization last week, where since 2016, when I left a job that was really stressful, but I'd already been interested in holistic practice since my youngest son was born. So I've explored loads of different avenues, whether it's homeopathy, reflexology, astrology, all of the gamut. And so, some of it I've used with my kids. I've used, had success, whole range of things. And one of the reasons, I had a really bad car accident 2 years ago, and it's yoga and meditation that really has done, I wouldn't say I'm completely healed, and there's probably certain reasons why I still have this issue with my back or whatever, but so I know the power, and I think in a way I've experienced the power, and also the different layers of subtle layers that we have. But when I was leaving my job and I started researching, because I thought, should I go back to doing one-to-one work? Should I do coaching? Should I do therapy? And I was like, I don't, so that was kind of clear that I wasn't really like, oh yeah, I really want to work. And then I started doing a bit of research and sampling areas to see how many coaches there were. And, you know, like if you're setting up as a business, you do a bit of a exercise to see how saturated the market is. So it's like, how saturated was the market? So I went on, we've got like a national therapy register, and I went on and had a look how many therapists were UK, how many looked like they're working private, in what areas, same with coaching, same with healers, same with Reiki. And I was like, wow, you know, like, at what point will we have so many healers and no clients? And then, of course, last year, unless you could go online straight away and offer something, and a lot of people started offering things for free or at low cost, especially where lockdown occurred and you couldn't work in a building. And all of that was stopped here. You know, it was very just essential, so-called government's view of essential, like supermarkets and doctors. You couldn't even get a dentist for 6 months. And so all of those private practices were shut down, unless my friend does quantum touch, and she does distant healing. And she just said all along she likes working in that way, and has carried on and has chose that's the way that she'll carry on doing it. And then I thought, actually, if you think about the sort of groundswell, you know, this concept of 122,000 people, or one person that raises their frequency creates a bigger field around them that will create. Sorry, what's that? Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, I was going to ask you if you wanted it, but I thought it was a bit twee. Does it? Is yours broke?
No, I haven't got a mic on it.
Has that got a mic on it?
Yeah.
Oh, I might have to borrow it then.
I don't know if you follow numbers, but as soon as you told me to stop, they told me to look down at my phone, and I've had some repeating numbers recently, and it's 1233 here and 77%, and 33 has been like, I tell people like it's haunting my dreams right now. It's been so profound in the 33. So I'm like,
yeah.
And what are you trying to tell me?
Three's a triad, isn't it? It's the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and
or whatever version of that you want. I always do the mind, body, spirit side of it. But yeah,
so
I really like having these conversations with you.
They're cool, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, really
I like
that this is going to be the theme of the show, is these deep conversations where you and I might have a couple of things that we've listed, but really the conversation's so open. It just flows through. I really see us doing that. And then as far as guests go, they always kind of give me this understanding that the guests come.
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
and actually that's a good point, and I'm quite happy for you to point things out in the future, because I have a tendency to still try and make things happen and not trust, you know. And when I was going through that process of looking at all these people, healers and everyone that was around, what occurred to me is actually they're the ones that have acted, the external training that they did for someone else was actually meant for them, because my therapy training was certainly for me first and foremost, and some of the other things that we learn. And you can give people a few tools and you can help people on the journey, or we can support that in some sort of way. But the numbers was what was surprising me, and I thought, no, this has become the movement of what has enabled the wave of everything that's just come in last year to come in. That's facilitated.
It feels it literally, they showed it to me as in like, so they show like a cement slab, right? And then you slam something onto the slab and it causes cracks. Okay, so it cracked the foundation last year. And they're like, so you want to fill it with gold? And I'm like, I don't want to fill it with gold. And they're like, go fill it with gold then. And so that what you're seeing is this collective filling this foundation that was cracked with gold pieces now, instead of going back to old style of like, the only way I can survive is brick and mortar, having this commonplace business practice and ideas and that type of paradigm or matrix, if you will. And now people are coming in and saying, well, I'm not even available to do that. like we're not even allowed to do that. So we have to come up with these new creative aspects. Well, quantum healing is at the forefront of everything. And, you know, as much as we're being dismissed as quantum healers, the reality is I don't care how dismissive any scientist is on somebody that can't even prove what quantum theory truly means.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have a grasp on that. I'm not going to listen to the naysaying of it, because people,
Yeah.
the scientists are questioning consciousness because of quantum theory. And
Yeah.
if you're questioning that, then you're telling me that I'm on the right path. And I'm not going to listen to your lack of evidence to tell me just because you have a degree. Well, your degree is not in this quantum philosophy. Your degree is in science and you're trying to learn quantum. Nobody understands quantum as much as they say they do. They don't. And that's across the board. You literally have scientists that are, you know, disproving each other in the middle of trying to prove each other right.
I think the tricky bit sometimes is, and I think there is, I think some of the concepts from the what could become the old paradigm around what would have been CBT, so like the process you talked about earlier, cognitive behavioural therapy, or the understandings of those, I would like to see just come more mainstream anyway, because there should just be tools that kids learn, like what you're saying about your son. But the interesting thing about the energy is, unless you're doing, say, practices that would have sort of been synonymous with starting to feel and experience energy, because it depends on how we operate. Everything else outside of that seemed as though it wasn't part of the narrative. Whereas more recently, and I think like the experience you had where you said you felt like, because when you were talking, I could see what you were saying. It was like this really strong thing of these walls coming in like this, boing, and the windows going like that, and actually there's sort of two levels to that. The one is the experience of what that is telling you in terms of where you're at, but also that you can bend the wall and see a shape in a completely different way. Just as when I spoke to my friend about this only recently, and she'd said to me that sometimes when she's just really focused on the picture and she's sending healing, she starts to see the face change. And I went, oh my God, you get that as well. I remember staring at this picture and looking at this face. And you know, when you go in peripheral vision and you see it, and it's like, because you're entering a different space. So trying to define it or understand it has been sort of sitting, hasn't it, with Tai Chi, Taekwondo, the martial arts. They've understood it for a long time. And the healing, again, because everything's fragmented, has been sitting with what used to be called spiritual healers. And I think the tricky bit in all of this is because we have an association. So people said to me before, it's spiritual healing. Well, I could have called it that. But I had a really strong association with spiritualist churches that I used to go to. And they used to sing hymns, and I found them really like weird.
Worshipy?
Weird.
A little worshipy, a little let me externalize yet another thing to something else when I should be like not necessarily worshiping myself, but like all of that external praise needs to come back here so that it extends energetically through the collective. Yeah, I you know, I have sat inside of understanding religion for a while because I've had really amazing experiences inside of religion.
Yes.
I had a kidney disease that I relapsed 7 times. And we were talking about dialysis and talking about, you know,
Wow.
here. And I was 12 years old and it was my seventh relapse. And my mom, you know, I was on, they had me started on prednisone. And then they ended up putting me on a pill form called Cytoxin. And I was losing my hair. I was, you know, like you could count every bone on my back, you know, down the spine. And I just was not healing. We went to a church, I want to call it, I think it was an Episcopalian church, and they laid hands on me. And I remember having just this feeling come over me, like all of those hands. And I never relapsed again. 2 weeks later, I went to the doctor. I was off medication. I never relapsed. I was told I wasn't supposed to be able to have kids because of the stuff that I was on. They said that was like a 15% chance of ever having children. I've been pregnant 3 times, carried them full term, you know, and so I always knew that there was something with touch. I knew that something was there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have healed the way I did. And this is like a 12-year-old girl. I didn't understand spiritual. I didn't understand religion. I didn't understand any of that. Now, I did get really religious after that. And I would take myself, you know, my mom would drop me off at church, you know, a couple of days a week. And I, you know, and I found these things, these aspects of church I really enjoyed, but I couldn't turn a blind eye to the things that were going on in the church.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's what makes it a challenge, isn't it,
and
sometimes?
so now again, this goes back to us talking
That
about
contradiction, isn't it? I really like this, but I can't do it in this
I
space.
can't do it in this space. And it becomes like that friend group again, where it's like, I'm not fitting in.
Yeah.
You know, I'm seeing things a little differently. So I took
Yeah.
myself out of that space. I've read the Bible a few times from Old Testament all the way to the end of New Testament. And, you know, when you're sick at home, and it was before internet, there's not a lot that you can do. And so, you know, I really dived into and at the end of the day, and through all of my understanding, the reality is, you know, the foundation of church, we've got to get it back down to that. The religion has to go back down to foundation. It is just too far gone. There's too much harm. Part of my spiritual journey was not being mad at Jesus anymore, you know, and not being mad at God anymore, because we've externalized and given them so much power that we've taken away all of our power.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you know, if we look at Jesus Christ as an ascended master, then you'll see that you should be walking that path the way the Buddha is an ascended master, you know. And if we change out the simple phrasing of died for our sins, and you change that one word to fear, you know, we died because of our fear, it makes a lot more sense. And you can even go back to the original script and the original language, and it meant fear. It didn't mean sin.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you go into those understandings that fear is the sin we're talking about, you know, and we've been externalizing the savior and building the fear resources inside of us. Then, you know, then what is it exactly Jesus died for? Nothing. He died because of.
So you've touched on two things there, though. You've touched on how we interpret the information that was created in the context it was. And I think a lot of people don't realize, same as yoga, you know, it's like, oh, yoga's not this unless you do it this. Well, no bollocks, because I'm not an athlete. And one of the people who created yoga, his dad was in the army. They used to do those gymnastic routines. That's why, I can't remember which style that is now. And then the other yoga was created by physiotherapists who wanted their patients to heal. So yin yoga was born because it meets the need, and something will evolve when it meets the need. And then you've got the other aspect.
Agni yoga, is it Agni, AGNI or ANG?
No, it's one of the main ones. It's like yoga's really come from three camps, really. And you know, when it's come into the West. So the one that is very intense,
like hot yoga.
the hot yoga's linked with Bikram, and Bikram is that whole other journey. It might have even been Bikram actually, whose dad was in the British Army in like a gym. I'd have to look it up actually if I was going to talk about this online, because I keep getting them mixed up. But again, it's this assumption about like with the spiritual healing is because spiritualism actually does mean different things to different people, because it doesn't mean now what it actually really meant. Spiritualism was just contacting, like a medium was contacting the afterlife. It didn't mean esoteric. And that's what we really often mean now by spiritualism, is actually esoteric practice. He's interested in all that other stuff out there. And then when I go to those places, because we take our values or the ways that we see things about what we like and don't like everywhere, don't we? So like when you went to the church, it meant something to you because you thought the thing that had really helped you was coming from there. So it goes in that context.
That just like feeling inside of this temple, this space.
Yeah. So it's like you've associated the meaning to that, and I associate the meaning to religion in that I saw it as an observer because my mum was quite anti-religion. She was brought up in a really religious family, but I saw it because for me, the behaviours that I saw too were how do you profess to be this? And I think those values have always been who you are, and we don't always manage it, and that being reflected in your behavior and how you treat people is still how I view religion, and the interpretation of the spirituality in that setting was when I was exploring it, the options were really limited. The options as a girl to get information outside of a couple of things I by chance came across.
Really tells you something, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When the feminine is being held back from certain things, it tells you the power that we truly hold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't know what you don't know, do you? So and it's a bit like anything really, because I was chatting to my friend the other night about identity and this idea of mixedness and mixed race and culture and all of that. And I said it's the same thing. I said I only viewed myself in the way that I did because that was the narrative we used in that context. But when I got married and had my kids and had totally different cultural experiences, I could now start to realize how that narrative was always really limiting, because the messages that we got never fit the context or the narrative that I was in. So I've always had this sort of dichotomy of my name has never fit my face and accent, and my way of racializing things or whatever never fit the cultural narrative either that we got. So there was never going to be a fit because or my interests never fit the culture I grew up in, because no one, you had to be like that. You had to, I did hide it on purpose, being spiritual, being interested in things, even though I'd had these weird experiences. Or I would call something this because that was the language. So we've been limited in language. We've been limited in the narrative we get. We've been limited in understanding what's outside of ourselves, which is that spiritual sphere that was sitting in this religion of some sort. So if we only had a limited experience of that, and we either went that fits me or it doesn't, and there was no other options, then that's what suffering is as well, isn't it? Because then you suffer because you haven't been able to grow it, because we're not taught to tune into ourselves and allow whatever words and information come to us, because the language itself has been created as a limiting factor, hasn't it? Yes. Because the language, when you unpack it and really dive into it, means
even
a lot.
Impulses have been limited.
What's that?
Even natural impulses have been limited by religion.
Everything's been limited, hasn't it? So the way that we see the world and what's been given to us. And so the amount of people that, and it's always been synonymous or associated with, say, being gay or being black in a white area or whatever, on really sort of tough things. But actually, when we come down to it and we all sat here and we go, well, we've all been on a spiritual journey, but we couldn't tell anyone. Our families would think us mad. We'd be locked up. Or if we got these books, they'd call us a witch, and all of these things start flying out. So in order to protect yourself, you stay away from those things that cause
and put under boxes and blankets.
On top of all the other repressive behaviors that keep us limited. So that's why I was interested in finding out more about what you meant about freedom and breaking free, because as we're talking, I'm thinking that to me is what freedom's starting to sound like. Not the idea of the physical moving about that I loved, of going from place to place, and whether it was the coast or a new city or something in the UK, very simple ways of feeling free. But actually, maybe it's because we've got so much information now. We can choose, like what you said, we can choose what we reflect to or align with, and really feel that, wow, that fits, I like that. But I don't have to like it forever. It's okay to like it right now.
Yeah. On my journey that I've taken, I like to use this spiritual resource for myself, and it's I started within like the Egyptian learnings, and then I moved into the high priestess learnings, and then I moved into the ascended master learnings, and now I'm sitting in the angelic learnings.
Yeah.
And And those can be called whatever you want, because it's, you know, that's part of what I'm trying to do, is connect dots between, you know, Archangel Michael and Ganesha actually work in the same realm and they produce the same energies. And so that's, you know, I just find it to be I'm not, again, I'm not here to make up words. And so if angels is a common theme across the world, then I will use the term angels. Okay.
Yeah, because that's how one person ends up being able to relate to another person. We've got to have some shared common language, haven't we? We can play around.
And then the angel realm, you can also, if you were to talk to somebody that works in these alien type things, they're the Arcturians. Okay, so there is just, and then you can dimensionally put them where they go. And so, you know, you can, once you start kind of, and it's like, let's stop trying to be so individual that we've lost our sense of community, kind of thing for me. You know, that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, hey, we are here for an individual journey, but the reality is we have some basic functions that are the same. So why don't you stop trying to like separate yourself so much that you don't have this common thread anymore. But yeah, so, you know, when I went through these, they would, every time I would go into these, to start with the Egyptians, they'd be like, this is a limited path. Then to the high priestess, this is a limited path.
Really?
I would move into the ascended masters. This is a limited path. I move into the angels. And I remember, because this is what I'm working in now, I remember getting mad at the angels.
Is it a limited path?
Yeah, and they said, you know, you're meant to move beyond this path too. This is what you're meant to do. You're meant to learn under all of these different places. And then that limit, that wall,
and not tightly hold on to that forever. Which
religion is merely another step.
Yeah.
In your direction of understanding self and spirituality. And so it's like, you were talking about this in even relationships earlier. We say, okay, I'm at this certain age, I have to get married and I have to have kids. Well, I ended up marrying a jerk. Well, I'm stuck, so I guess we'll just work around this, right? Well, you're not seeing the picture beyond that, because your walls have been built in this one frame. And so you have this opportunity to keep learning and keep understanding and taking on new aspects of it. If religion is your thing, then take up some theology, understand some of the science behind it, understand some of the language behind it, understand the depths of it. You know, reading the Bible doesn't get you far. Understanding the Bible gets you far. And that's away from the noise that everybody's trying to teach you inside of. That's their own interpretation of the Bible. My interpretation of spirit is going to be different than even my best friend's, you know, interpretation of spirit. So
because we have different filters. So and this is probably one of the things that is the hardest thing to sort of teach from psychology, is that all the information that comes through, because we all can access all the same information, but when it comes through our mental filters, which for a long time it will, and then it links to, you know, some kind of experience of that, then we give it some meaning. And it's all of those almost like boulders we place in front of things that will reduce it right down to looking like something. And then we go, foregone conclusion, it's that. And it's that constant foregone conclusion that it looks that way. And this utter like, what do you mean you can see it differently, or it is different? Just like you said with politics or relationships. Because I think I've stunned a few friends over the last few years because they've had some difficulties in their relationships. And one of my friends, she's been married for 30 years. And I just said to her, what's the likelihood that he's actually really going to change now? Because the behaviour surely is fairly well embedded, unless the rub is affecting him as it is you. So you're at choice, aren't you? You either accept that the rub is there and maybe there's some behaviours you need to change if it's not too outside, or you don't, you know, you do or you don't. Because
you cannot get mad at the choice that you made, and you're no victim in that choice. And that's the whole, like, you know, and that's the hard part. And it's so difficult to not become passionate in an angry form to the choices that we're actively making, and then claiming victim inside of those choices. You know, every day we wake up and we make choices that define what our next step is, and that is just very simple, basic stuff. And you don't get to say, I'm going to choose to go out and get smashed tonight, and then the next morning play victim to the hangover. Like, you
because
made
it's
that
ruined your
choice.
day.
You continue to go back to this type of environment, and then you're expecting different outcomes. I'm pretty sure the definition of insanity falls inside of it.
It does.
It's just, for me, it's like, then we've been taught to be victim. We've been taught to externalize. We've been taught to,
To wait for the other.
This, right. That's going to fix. Well, that's not, that's that person's interpretation. That's not you. You're an individual with individual needs. And even though we have a baseline, because we have a baseline, everybody comes from this baseline, and then we have this individual like coding inside of us that makes us who we are. And then we have the ego to express that coding. But
then often people are dating the hologram of who they think the person is.
Yes.
And actually the person has become possibly the person that they've had to become, because that's the easiest way to navigate the relationship. And that's the other thing. It's like, check out whether they are actually that person. Did they ever really want to go on that trip? Did they ever? Because they're the kind of things that happen inside marriages, aren't they? Yes. Or actually, is it that through this you can realize how unrealistic your behaviors and attitudes are to other people, because you're living through them in some kind of dynamic that you both agreed to that doesn't fit anymore.
It doesn't fit.
Which is how, well, if it's like that and he's got needs that you can't respond to, why is there just two of you? Maybe polygamy is the way forward.
I am fully back. My husband and I had an experience, and here we call it the lifestyle. And so it's like swingers, except for the lifestyle being that you're friends and you continue relationships. And it's a step. It's like a step in between swinger and polyamory. It kind of sits in that weird gray zone where, you get to literally see all of people's like trauma displayed, it's wild. Anyways, it was good for a lot of reasons. It brought out this confidence in me I hadn't had before. It forced conversations with my spouse that otherwise would have gone unheard. And so there's so many positives inside of this, open marriage concept that allows people, because it's like, well, first off, we already know that we never stop growing. Okay. We've learned this. I think in general, the population has learned this, our parents, we stopped blaming them finally. So now it's like, okay, we got to come back to self. I can't go and repeat that cycle. We're starting to grasp that concept as a whole. But for me, it's like, lifestyle polyamory would not work for me in my lifestyle, but as an individual, I got to choose that. And my marriage chose that. And our marriage, we learned the lessons of this type of lifestyle and chose to step away from it as we were a team, because we were a team when we walked in. We're going to be a team when we walk out. It's not a fix a marriage solution. It's like, it's more along the lines of extending out that love is love and it continues beyond. And just this one.
But also it's an experience, just like the exploration of the Egyptians and the Arthurians or whatever. It equally is just an experience of a strand of life that we haven't gone down, because there is so much wrapped in that. And as you're saying, it's true, because I think you have to know yourself pretty well, otherwise there is a possibility of reenacting trauma, and that happens in a lot of cases. However, a lot of it is healing too, in the right circumstances. And if you're in something that has been distorted, or you see it, but it's actually distorted, and it is a murky grey area, because again, that's been condemned. And yet, our sacral chakra, root chakra, is about survival and harnessing very powerful energy that sits within, whether it's a real or imagined part of our systems, that takes us towards creation and consciousness, not in the way that it's been taught about. But again, I don't think that may just be conversations that are starting to open up when I look at the trends that are out there. But when it's,
Polyamory is definitely taking its step forward, you know, and don't get me wrong, I have, you know, made many friendships inside of this lifestyle group. You know, even though we've chosen a couple of years ago to stop being inside of that group, you know, the friendships that formed and the bonds that formed are continued beyond that.
yeah,
This in a non-sexual way at all, you know, just the baseline of friendship. And I just lost my train of thought on that. What were we just saying? Oh my goodness, I totally lost my frame of thought. Basically, the lifestyle comes in and it teaches you, or you become.
yeah,
And it's like and so, oh, that's what it was. So what I've noticed is that what went from these people just having mindless sex with others, then kind of grew, because it too is its own matrix, and then it grew into this lifestyle where you became friends with those people, and now its natural evolution is polyamory, and then it will just recycle back into the swinger, and then it'll go back into the lifestyle, and then it'll go back into the polyamory, because it's not meant for everybody, and it's not
no,
meant to be a lifelong thing for everybody. And so this cycle appears in this way with purpose. And you know, you're you know, you might not find yourself wanting to be in anything less than a polyamory, but I do not see polyamory relationships lasting until people's 80s, and you know, death is upon you and you're on your deathbed with your 3 husbands. You know, I don't see that being like, I feel like it's always a phase, it's always a cycle, and it's a good cycle, and we need to stop putting good, I'm sorry, as I say that, they're telling me to stop putting good and negative, good or bad verses, but it's a cycle of learning and developing. And the key to that is like what we were just talking about: when you're done with the lesson, leave it alone.
yeah, you're done with the experience and the desire to test something out. And I've gone equally through experiences the last few years. It took me ages to be okay with, and then it's like, you know, this sort, and again, it's that internal stuff we have to deal with. It for me was a fight at times. And I didn't realize, because this is something that I read after doing Kundalini yoga for 4 years. Actually, because people, when they talk about Kundalini awakening, they make it sound, and actually,
I
it's
have
not.
no idea what they're talking about. It's ridiculous.
Well, there may be some people that have this. I think a bit like what you're saying about the journey. Some people will have a moment. Now, for me, that was a car crash, and it was also a car crash at the end of my, not a metaphorical one, at the end of my marriage. It, I'm slow and progressive, and sometimes I'll have major incidents like that, and then that is a curveball in my life. And for other people, they describe it as a wow. But it took me ages to realize, actually, I've been activating my Kundalini ever since probably 6 months into Kundalini yoga and not realized it. But at the same time, started to have these really powerful thoughts and urges and sensations and everything.
Affirming my thought pattern and how the Kundalini works. And I'm consistent in teaching this, which is, you know, you've got to fire your chakra system on. And the Kundalini is merely like something that slides to connect through this chakra system. Okay. And it's like going in with no lube. If you don't have your chakras turned on, they don't have to be fully fired and activated on 100%.
Yeah.
They at least need to be on to help lube that Kundalini energy. I, you know, obviously I always see it as a snake, you know, the
Yeah.
Kundalini energy to walk itself through and connect your chakra system, so it's all online and it's all consistent talking to each other.
But you can stay in that, you can stay in the root chakra element or the sacred chakra, because if you've not figured out those sort of baselines like what you're saying, then we'll keep having to revisit what's there. And again, that took me a while, because there's a part of me, the thing I've always rejected is, one is, I've been choosy about therapists that I've seen in the past, because when you train as a therapist, we have to also go into therapy anyway. But I'd be choosy in what I talk about, because you can kind of sense how far people can go. And also that I, again, associated with being really honest and upfront and saying this is how it really was, with sounding like I was a victim and I had that narrative, which I never have been. you know, I just either knew or didn't know or became more aware of what I was experiencing. Like you, then we go, I'm at choice point now. So do I want to keep experiencing kissing the same frog or having this experience? Well, yeah, I know I'm going to do it again. And I know I'm going to lie to myself. So I might as well be truthful with myself that I know I'm doing that again, but that's fine because that's the decision I made.
Accountability really helps.
Yeah.
Just a little, like, it's neither good nor bad, it just is. So just accept it and say, I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. I'm aware I don't know how to change those reasons. I'm going to go
Yeah.
cycle.
Or I'm revisiting, I've still got, you know, there's either a compulsion there or a fascination or or an interest or whatever. And it was only when I went to that space, and that was it's not a dark space, it was just a conflicted space because the people I was coming into contact with,
Yes,
of sort of taking what for me were big risks for my sort of personality, of then realizing, like what you're saying, well, it doesn't mean to say I'm you know, I thought sometimes you take these steps and you think you've become that, so I guess it's that fear of losing yourself in what you're becoming, because you might end up realizing what you're becoming isn't anything that really was that attractive, and you tested it out a bit like eating a strawberry lolly and you thought you always liked it and you don't, and then you can say no, but there's no,
let's change.
yeah, that you can change your mind or go, well, actually, it's just like when you get a new car, you really love the new car and it's dead attractive and you desire it and you want to drive it, like all the other experiences. And but initially, it's like I made a really big deal out of like what I was starting to experience, and so I was like, no, I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to stay in this space and I'm not going to act on anything. And then eventually it was like, right, this curiosity is just, you know, it's obviously.
We are not meant to live these perfect existence. We are meant to walk these cycles. We are meant to become the lesson now and again. We're meant to like do all of these things that we fight so hard to be this perfect, you know, this perfect person deserving of a heaven experience. And that's just not the case. You know, like we've done this.
And again, that's the pattern, and that's another pattern, isn't it? Is that to be spiritual, is to be pure, is to talk like this.
Same with religion, you know, to be pure, spirituality, to be pure. Well, and then people like, you know, I had this major awakening, and part of my massive lessons is, you know, through, you know, Lucifer and through Lilith and through Sekhmet and through like these, you know, the dark side of Kali and the dark side of, you know, these, you know, because Hathor's dark side is Sekhmet, and it's like
shadows.
And the realization is that my shadow is mine. I just need to be aware of it. And it doesn't make me, you know, it doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me any less spiritual. In fact, my angels cheer when I give a person the business, because I'm coming from my truth space and I'm coming from my heart space. And they're like, yes, this is what we need. There is no light and dark. There just is. Continue forward. You know, and it makes a lot of sense, you know, and don't get me wrong, darkness is very there, but I remember having a meditation where Lucifer came to me and he said, I'm only as dark as your darkest shadow. And I was like, well, shit, you know, let me think about that. And, you know, it puts you down. It makes you really put into some thought. And, you know, and then not my angels, I'm sorry, my high priestess came through and said, you know, like, take a look at that black cat. Why are you mad at the black cat? Why are you not simply stating, perhaps I should pay attention for my next few steps? The black cat is a warning system. Lucifer is a warning system. But that energy simply put a torch to light all the crap that he has put here to light up. And that's
and if you go in that crap, there is a possibility, if your mechanisms aren't strong or intact, or choices that you've made or beliefs that you have about yourself can just make that journey then quite a tough one. And in a way, that's why having the conversations or putting some theory around it, because I don't have to theorize things or intellectualize it, but what that certainly helped me, that when I did my training, I learned the theory to understand why my mum acted like she did, and why I had those responses, and then why I carried certain pain and things like that. So not to stay there and to be a victim of it, but the theory itself sometimes, like because Carl Jung is equal in terms of what you were saying. Carl Jung's idea about the shadow, and Freud's idea that everyone goes, ugh, you know, but Freud talked about, you know, the sort of stages, the infantile stages that we grow through. And there's so much in that information that tells us really the basic structure of humanity is we are dogs sometimes, and sometimes we're angels, and we can be horrible and mean and cruel and all those things. And if we can't see that in ourselves, there's a risk of either losing that control, or going to that space and not coming back, or really hurting someone else. And that's my understanding of what karma is then, is, you know, we might bring this stuff from, if it's all these lives now or past lives or whatever, I don't really care what that is. I just know that this shit that we have with us, and then this shit we can make right now.
Exactly. That is exactly right. You know, we have all of these people, and I'm not here to state that that looking into your past life won't give you a vision of your future. Okay? But I find people would rather be focused on these past lives or these future lives, that they're not focusing on the steps,
on the present moment
right now. And it's like, you know, for me, past life has only been an important role in the aspect of karmic fate. And even in that, I realized that regardless of what that karma was, I'm given the tools now. And the steps that I take now are what's
so we can look at that. Okay, do I bring some good stuff with me? What resources can I bring back that I can reintegrate? And can I look at that and go, okay, well, I didn't know better, you know, and I can make sure that I either help other people understand the same sort of thing, or I work through that and understand then how I can not get into that space again, or what does that tell me? And that's the difficulty with, in a way, I think it's one of the reasons I don't step up fully, or sometimes I don't quite know which, because I don't want to be the teacher, because that sits there and then everyone goes, oh yeah, you know, I get that, and people start to resonate with you, and then they want to know what you think about everything, because it removes them again from themselves. And I'm like, hey, I had to do all this work to get here. You need to do work as well. I don't mind sharing the odd thing, and you have a light bulb moment, and there's a tool that you can use. And it's partly what didn't attract me to doing therapy, because when I did the training, our approach was open-ended. People could work with each other 6 months a year, and I always said, someone needs to work with you for that long, they need some tools. That I am just talking about it. And also, I don't want that client, and it's not because I don't love them and want them to be happy
or to be better. It's just they literally are asking you to do the work for them.
Yeah, or I don't want to just think that for the next year I can't really book the level, the freedom approach that I have to life, because I've signed up, and this client, because you only have to go on Quora to see how devastated a lot of clients are because the therapist did this, or they didn't tell them about, and I'm like, oh my God, that's just like way too much responsibility.
It's just another externalizing thing. I'm now the victim because you didn't give me all the information.
But there's so much on that.
I have 1 hour and you're talking throughout all of it. I can't really give you, well, I guess 45 minutes, you know what I mean? But, you know, I do believe in therapeutic services, but, you know, I use them as needed. If I have something.
I think there's a role. I think there's a role for, like, through grief, for example. Sometimes you need to be
tools out, you know, tools more than like a homework assignment that says, I feel this. Well, the reality is this is kind of what started my whole journey towards, was I was going to therapeutic services, and I was just like, again, I was going deeper than the therapist was able to reach. And I was sitting there trying to explain things to bring them to my level, and I'm like,
to teach them.
Why am I paying you to do this? So I kind of just gave it up. And this is kind of where my human design studies came in. you know, we can really, and I feel like you're probably doing the same thing with the genetic, that code key, is, you know, there's some evidence behind this and helping the psychology of it. And if we combine these tools,
Yeah,
you know, and I can look at you and say, well, you act like this because of this and this is how you're hardwired. So
yeah,
let's figure out how we work within these parameters instead of saying this one size fits all therapy for
yeah.
people. We will get a
But
lot further in our understanding of self and unraveling that tangled web.
yeah, because that's the thing about having different models, is you don't get suckered into thinking that that is, you know, the explanation for the whole of humanity. And the different models, like for me, Jung talked about dreams and the psyche and the stages that we go through in life, you know, teenage years, old woman, crone or whatever. Freud talked about projection, transference, all of that. That's used in business all the time now. The CBT model is great because it's exactly what we talked about, where you learn to think about, you learn to notice your thoughts and the impact on your emotions. And on, so they all have a place on the table of the buffet and the banquet in terms of where you're at and what you need right now.
Mhm.
But also the sort of psychology bit, and so some of the psychology I think will wane. But the bit I loved about the gene keys, and I think might have even trained together at some stage, there are parallels. But the bit that really freed me up in a way was because I can't remember how many keys, but you get like a diagram and it's keys related to different aspects of your life. And the key they've all got a number in them, and that's this is it for your life. This is your code, your DNA. But the number has the shadow and the gift, and it talks about the process of what happens when you're in the shadow. So when you read it, you can go, shit, that's where I am, or
See,
no,
and the
that's where I'm
human
meant to
design
be.
is very similar, and we don't call it shadow, we call it the not self theme. And
Yeah.
so, you know, you're not working inside of what speaks to you. And so this, and I feel tremendously. So at the end of the day, I think that we're just a giant computer system. And
Yeah,
we are the programmers of this computer
yeah,
system, okay?
yeah,
And
yeah.
you're programming what you need. Now you have your hardware and your software. Our hardware is that baseline that everybody's
Is
like,
that, yeah,
but then your software is different. And you know, your DNA sequencing can be changed. You can recode it. Now they say at the age of, what is it? The age of 8 is when your DNA codes kind of stick, right? And so then it becomes
well,
a bell curve or something. So if like a person is dealing with an abandonment up to the age of 8, it
no,
kind of
that's
sticks.
so that's more linked with I think it's transactional analysis, or the psychology is that all you sort of you formed already, all your beliefs, patterns, all of that is formed by 8. That's your view of the world. I think it's much younger now. I think it's probably by 1 or 2. But with the interesting thing about the keys and probably the human design, it sounds like it's a similar concept. But what's also interesting coming through new research about food is that if we have these codes in our DNA, is one, what the gene key says related to what you were saying earlier, is that you don't have to try, because at some point there's a symbiotic relationship, or we might call it alchemy, where whatever is in your system that hasn't ripened yet or that hasn't been activated will through, and sometimes it might be the energy that's coming from the stars or what happened on the 21st, will connect with that code in your
Yes,
DNA
this is
and
how I feel.
activate
This is
it.
that's spot on. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
so we'll
combination of
activate
that. I
it.
always tell people that spirit's willing to meet you halfway. You got to
Yeah,
meet them too.
so you do it, you get aware, you experience life and you feel what's going on, and it gives you an understanding. So mine gave me an understanding to the ever perpetuating circles I was creating through this consistent old belief of hard work and being at things and exhausting my system out, which I've done several times. And so the freedom of just knowing, in a way, do I want to be a computer with no free will? I don't think it's entirely that, but that these keys are there. So these keys are like, you know, we've got these shadow elements and we have to look at, is
Right.
that what's causing us distress? How do we turn it into the gift or the siddhi, which is the gold mine element?
Exactly.
which is what you said about, do we want to fill the cracks with gold? Do we want to see flowers shooting up out of that place that you wouldn't expect? But also the science is showing that that these molecular structures that create our organism can be switched on and off as well.
That messenger RNA is such a huge, to know what that it forms that cell, it forms this and how your cells revamp themselves all the time, and you're constantly flushing. We'll go back to that. I love using Inside Out all the time. They have this whole marble system, and you notice that if like there was a bunch of red marbles for anger, that then it would start to flow out, and it would change the color sequence of the happy and the and the sad. It would start to change that color sequence all across the board for it. And this is where, for me, free will plays a huge role in it. Do I have this? Yes. Is this my DNA sequencing? Yes. But who's the programmer? Me.
Yeah.
And so now I have the free will to choose how I'm going to change this programming inside of me. And for me, it's like, okay, I still am not 100% sure that we can't change our full DNA sequence, but I know 100% we can change that messenger RNA.
Well, we must be able to. We must be able to change it, because they are changing it, because the research that's going into the RNA, it's the RNA within the COVID that people are so worried about, because it changes the COVID itself is what is also changing our DNA. And then the vaccine, I don't know, jury's out in my head about what that's about, but that equally can be something that is changing it. So over the years, in terms of the evolution, those things are changing. And then all those natural cycles of, whether or not our skin sheds and we have a new body within 7 years, and those things have speeded up. So I think the science is showing us that they are changing that. They can't quite manipulate in the way that they want to, because we haven't quite got the master race or whatever.
We can even step that back and look at like our grandparents. Now, our grandparents at our age, they looked old. They looked old. They had the gray hair. They had like full shade gray hair. They had wrinkles. They looked like old people. But then our parents at this age didn't look like old people. And I feel like it's like we are that capable of evolution. Like we can just push that evolution on it, and it's just boom, you wake up in an entire generation of people look younger for longer. And you can tell me that it's because we have this certain thing, but the environment's dirtier, the environment is toxic, and we can't guarantee that these products put on our face are actually changing anything, and we can't, like, there's nothing there. But I can just simply look at my grandmother at my age and now look at myself at that age and be like, whoa, like that right there shows you some kind of evolutionary change. And
and that is happening, that they're making that discoveries are speeding up so much. And the research shows also how we influence the behavior of the cell. So the DNA information might change according to what the role of the cell is, but I don't know, I think maybe there's only probably 7 key roles in the whole of the body, and maybe there's a million of cell A and there's a million of cell B. I don't quite know, but it's sort of, for me, it's because it's simple and complex, that actually we can influence those things, because they know in research, if you're a researcher, they used to do ethnography studies. So it used to be an old white guy that go and study an African tribe and sit there for months and months and months and think he's become part of a tribe, and he study them. But what they learned in all that research was that the moment you start to look at something, and this came out in later films like The Secret and What the Bleep, the moment you start to look at something, you change the quantum field anyway. And depending on what your focus is, or going back to that thing I said about existentialism as a therapy response, is you look at it and you then have a fleeting moment of how you decide how to perceive it, because that's not really a conscious process. I can look now and go, oh, it looks like my cardigan, but why am I calling it a cardigan? that's the name we gave to the thing. What gives it the dimensions of a cardigan? Well, it's wool. So cardigans are made of wool. So we then create this whole criteria, but really, is it really a cardigan? And so there's all of these, and it's too much. And this is the thing that that's why we need the compassion, because it's too much for most brains to comprehend. The way that we're talking, some people be like, oh my God, my head is going to explode, because it's just a lot of stuff. And that's why, like you said earlier, I've taken loads of information, and somebody said to me a few times, it's like you've got the brain the size of a planet. And I was like, feels like that. And I don't know why.
Do not minimize my brain. It is as big as this universe.
Oh, I was overwhelming myself, and so I had to. It's where discernment came in. Is what do I want to know this week? And so the tool that was the best sort of tool for me to implement, being a free spirit and a bit liberal and bohemian, was a framework for my week. My weekend is free and do whatever I want, wake up, stay asleep, watch Netflix, whatever. I don't care. It's inspiration, it's inspired action. And during the week, it's like, no, I've got to get up and do some yoga. I'm going to have a drink and I do this. Because the framework or the boundary around that is what helps.
This is like your little foundation with the way you're building your house. You know, you want that framework to be there, and it needs to be quality, and it needs to fill with all the things that you need, because the walls can come up and down, and it's that foundation and that framework that are really integral.
But it manages. It's managing the chaos of the universe, because if you're so open. And Jordan Peterson, who is a psychologist that I love listening to, loads of people hate him because they don't understand what he's actually saying. But he basically talks about chaos and order. So at the moment, what we got is loads of chaos. But also he talks about the importance of order. So in a way, we don't like lockdown. I don't like being told what to do, blah, blah, you know, that's my nature. But the order is needed, because I think the world was about to also combust with plastics, with pollution, with spending, with buying loads of shit we didn't need. And
I think that Mother Earth really showed us what's up whenever we took that time off, because it was 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, we were starting to see like this smog that would fill the cities, like dissipating. We noticed the grass was greener, like there was more animals, there was more bird activity. And for me, it was like Mother Earth saying, I don't need you. I'm going to be fine.
We're the organism that, you know, if there's an organism bigger than us as organisms that look at our organisms, that was just fouling up the pavement and creating chaos for no, you know, it was out of hand. It was an unruly child.
For the dollar sign, for the money, for the aspect of money, we've been doing this damage. And it's just simply to chase this money. And it's
because it's a life that's been
people should work, people need to work. Well, what's your version of work? Because for me, I've been doing so much work during this time. You know, like I became like this huge improved person, and I've started a business plan, and I've, you know, my family is like in this beautiful space that they've never been in, and you know, so I did work. And I'm sorry that your version of work and my version of work are two different things, but in the spiritual realm, I was working overtime.
Well, that's how people perceive, because again, these are all narratives, aren't they? But I kind of suspect it's a bit like in any business, and in big business, say like the NHS in the UK or the big businesses, you have your business plan, and you create your project plan to execute the ideas and start making that business perform to do the things that you want it to do. But what sometimes happens, if you don't plan, do and review regularly in your business and have stopping points, you can end up with either your business getting so big but not the employees to manage it, so it gets unwieldy, or it evolves in a way that you wasn't expecting. So the thing that heartens me really, that even if there are puppeteers that have got magical tricks that I haven't learned yet or whatever, I don't know, but actually what potentially can happen is their business plan just fucked up. It worked, but there's only, that's what we've seen throughout history, isn't it? Empires do really well, they have leaders, they have gold, and everyone dresses nice, but you can't sustain things on that business plan, that operating model, because the operating model either needs, a bit like when Windows boots and upgrades, is your operating model needs to upgrade. So in a sense, this perpetuating cycle of, like in the 50s when they said to people, you'd be happier if you bought a washing machine, and then you're a better Christian if you eat Kellogg's cornflakes, or if you go shopping here, and then this cycle of consumerism that they fed, because we became ants for this market, that these,
well, it's like we learned just enough of the lesson of King Solomon to disperse some things, right?
yeah
But we haven't actually learned the lesson, which is, like the same things that wheel of fortune, if you will, the same things that put you up can also be the things that crash you down.
Yeah.
And so, we need to learn that lesson as a whole, that materialism side of thing is the demise of people. And
but at the same time, if we think about it through the lens of art, is something created because the creator designed that out of their inspired vision, and what somebody does with that and how that's marketed or whatever is someone else's choice. So you can buy something because you love that. I love my blinds, I love my bookshelf, I love my ornaments. You can love those things and you can appreciate them, but when there's a ever perpetuating cog that means that kids in India are going blind because the chemicals that they're using to make the t-shirts and things like that, and you look at the efforts of these things, and then you have to go back to your business plan and say, because actually to some degree it might have been those, I don't know, 3 families, but really it was the advertising mob, wasn't it? It was the hungry lot in the middle management layer that got a taste for things, that didn't want to share, and it was the selfishness.
There's plenty to go around, but somehow we feel like, it's mine. It always worries me when I see, these people that haven't done any of this work, and they go off and they become these business entrepreneurs, and they're just repeating these conditioned cycles that aren't going to get us any further ahead.
But they won't sustain themselves.
They will not
either, and they won't now, because
the energy is people are like, and taking these. I try to explain this too, because it goes back to that karma. People live in their own karmic fate, regardless if they acknowledge it or not. People that are going through these things and never being owned up to or recognizing who they are, what they represent in this, they're caught up in this loop, in this karmic fate loop, and you might not see, because from our version of what success is, they're married, they have kids, they have a business, they have good money, but we have no idea what's going on behind closed doors inside of their mind, and they're probably living out this terrible fate because they're not course correcting as they go.
Some are. But there's also some very healthy, rich, affluent, resourceful people.
Absolutely. I'm just meaning the people that are not taking care of themselves, the people that are not like learning from their mistakes or even owning their mistakes. They're just walking blindly through something.
Yeah, but don't you? I know that the message gets louder. So if I was, and who knows what the theory of why we're really here is, but as we evolve, if there is something, I used to call it the rub. It would be like, initially it's just a little glitch in thought you get, but then you go around doing the same thing for another 2 years. The message gets louder either in your workplace or with your partners, or you can't sustain it. So the only way to cope with the disaffection of it is to take drugs and drink, or have lots of meaningless sex, or which any of that for a time being is fine. It's only when you lose complete threads of your reality and you live then in this different distorted version. So, and I think that's the thing, it's like we that's where I would have a tendency in the past to think I could help them self-correct, but actually who am I to think that they should,
right?
Or that they
That's a hard
and it
one
was,
too. It's like when you can see somebody's making these poor choices, but the reality is that's your own ego wanting to rush in and save that and not allow that lesson
yeah,
to happen. I was a hard lesson for me as well, but it was, the reality was, is I plant the seed and I walk. Like
yeah,
here's your
yeah,
information. It will resonate and it'll integrate at the time it's meant to. And then I have to move forward, because if I get caught up in your cycle, in your matrix, in your wheelhouse, then I'm going down too. And I don't have that in me anymore. And more people need to just understand that we talk about magic or the higher beings or the higher self and the higher everything. The reality is if you just practice the basic laws of the universe, and the seven basic laws of this universe, you're going to make a lot of headway. And these laws of the universe are what the magic foundation is set from.
mm,
This alchemy, this magic, this whatever you want to call it, it all comes from this basic law. This, what I call the black and white checkerboard.
mm,
That's the black and white checkerboard, or the universal laws that have been proven time and again to work. And then our magic comes from that gray netting on the earth's laws, and and then what color we decide to add to it. um but I think we've overcomplicated simple things, and right now we're in this process of deconditioning these overcomplications of you know life itself. Life is not meant to be this hard. Life is meant to be this beautiful existence where you learn your lessons and you go through these things and you work together as a team. And do I believe that we've been here before as far as the collective and this type of a moment? Absolutely. The details are a little different. I feel like we stepped it up a notch this round. um like as far as
I have that
the
feeling.
planet
Yeah,
did not end up flooded this time. So that's good news. you know we got
yeah,
real close. We had all kinds of crazy things happening, but I think that as a collective we are doing better than we ever have. um,
yeah,
we have this ideal state of collective mind that we think we need to be in, but we got to get there first. And so if you just step all the way out and you see where we've come from and where we are now, we are making headway. We are in the right direction. We are taking the right steps. More and more people are coming out of that fear and
yeah,
realizing that they're ready for something new, and that the old way isn't working anymore, and it hasn't been working. And
yeah,
it's just time to take on these new steps, this new understanding. And it's going to be some growing pains, but like we had growing pains inside of our awakening. And as a collective, they're awakening every day to this new idea that there's more to going to work, taking your kids to
yeah,
practice, eating fast food, and then going to bed.
yeah. Yeah, they've been fascinating to watch them. But because as you were talking and you were saying, about we've obviously learned all these different theories and implemented a range of them into various stages of our lives. And we've now met for some reason, because, when Paul said, I want you to meet my friend, and I said to you, and I'm like, why do I want to meet your friends, Paul?
Literally what I said. I was like, why do I want to meet another friend? Like, I've met so many friends that have gotten me. They'll be like, "Oh, you'll love this person. This person's important," and then I'm like, "This person has no depth."
Yeah,
How
so I
do
was
you
like,
meet?
yeah. And I was like, no, and then he was like, I'll just ring her now. And I'm like,
And it
so
was
I
funny.
thought,
I never answer Paul's call in a random event. I would have never answered it. You could, if you were to look at him and I's messages, it's him
really?
talking to me and me ignoring it just all the time. Because he calls it inappropriate times. Like, like, come on, bro, be thoughtful of me and my existence. I exist too. And so
Yeah.
just because it's your time doesn't mean it's my time. But for what, like I said, you saw me. I had my hair in a top bun. I literally had a robe on. I hadn't even washed my face or brushed my teeth. And for whatever reason, I was like, I need to take this call.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I took the call, which was wild anyways. And I'm like, yeah. And then he's like, I remember the person I told you about, she's here. And I'm like, ugh, oh God, here we go again.
Yeah, because it's a bit, and you know what, it's taken me many years, because now I'm more comfortable on Zoom and Teams and WhatsApp or whatever, it's taken me many years to become to where someone just goes, it's like when you were a kid, talk to grandma, and you're like,
grandma, tell her how much you love her.
and I'm like, I don't want to. Why do I? What do you say? You know. So it was weird, and obviously we went with that process. So what's your feeling about? Because I don't know what you give me some idea what you want to work on, and you said you were exploring different ideas. But what is it that you've sort of see as the next few steps or unfolding, and what do you...
So obviously I've meditated and I've done some thought on this, because you are going to be one of the first experiences in what I call my BCAD Danielle. Okay. So I'm stepping into my new version of myself. And,
Okay.
and they keep reminding me.
So I must be in my new version of myself then, if we're mirroring each other.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so they told me to stop focusing on the way things used to go. And that starting from scratch here, and that literally the way things were will no longer be valid, because I would get to this point